So I'll get right into some intro. So in this talk, I'll tell you a little bit about my company, Endeavor, and myself, to give you a context of what my background is and why performance is important to me. Tell you, when you come away from a talk like this, it's great to have some tools, but the other thing is it's nice to know how to influence either clients or your boss on spending time, spending time or money on these tools to invest in performance. So I'll go through some case studies and some data for you, so you can bring it back. And then, of course, some tools. These are primarily performance monitoring tools, varying from open source to paid, freemium as well. And then also kind of going back into some trends so you can get an idea of where the internet, where it's lied around performance. We've been around for a while, the internet, not we, and it goes in cycles, as you'll see in some of these trends. Unfortunately, the trends that I got didn't go back quite as far as I was hoping this time. They've been trimming them, so it goes back to about 2010, but I can talk about even past then. And then open it for questions and discussion. If there is a slide up here that you have a question on, you can raise your hand and stop me. I'm perfectly fine stopping during the presentation. So quickly about us, Endeavor, we were founded a year ago. I moved out to Colorado at that time, and my two partners who are still in New Jersey. Most of our employees are in the New York metro area. We do a lot of web development, primarily around WordPress actually, but expanding out to a decoupled for React, a Node React in front of that a lot of times. It's getting very popular. I did a lot of Drupal before that, so a lot of PHP background for myself. The average experience of our team is 15 years each. And another thing about our company is that we offer, or actually almost require our employees to contribute about 4 hours a week in open source. So whether that's a project, whether that's opening up issues and hopefully contributing to them, blog posts about open source, doing speaking events at open source conferences. Yeah. So that equates to about 4 hours a week. And hopefully some do more, but each one is individual.
What's your role in the company?
So I'll go right into that. So I'm the president, one of three founders essentially. As you can see, I do have a technical background. I'm a technical architect with our clients. I play that role of lead engagement manager, helping architect some of the solutions, getting out into some of the newer technologies as they come out. I do have a Bachelor of Science degree from NGIT, New Jersey Institute of Technology. It's an engineering school. I've been doing this for 19 years professionally, a couple years before that, doing websites on my own for family and stuff. So pretty early on, but not quite as early on as some others. I've seen a lot of, and we'll talk about this during the trends, kind of a cyclical motion of performance and bloating and performance and bloating. I've been out here for a year, like I said. My family and I moved out here last summer to enjoy Colorado. And if you needed to reach out to me for questions, probably the easiest way would be Twitter, direct message, or you can find me on LinkedIn as well. Not a lot of people use that anymore, though. Hopefully I'll go a little slower since I didn't get my coffee, but I am going a little fast. So first off, why is it important at all? So I want to go through a case study. 303 Magazine is actually a client that we just started working with a couple of months ago. They're a local, they were a magazine, now they're a digital-only property. They also happen to be on WordPress. When they reached out to us, they were having a lot of site issues. If you've gone to the site over the past few months or previously, maybe the site was up, maybe it wasn't. Pretty much guaranteed it's up now. Hopefully, live demo. When we first looked at them, we were using, so before I even engaged with them, I asked them to install New Relic. They were using an AWS server, so I asked them to install New Relic on the machine, and so I can start getting some stats early on. So before I got access to the code, I was able to see a lot of data. One of the things I was able to see, and if you went left, you'd see basically the same things, flat. The amount of database queries was enormous, even for a WordPress or any CMS-based solution. The number of selects was just massive, and it turned out it was close to 10,000 requests per page. Very, very, very light requests, thankfully, but still way more than what would normally be on a typical media website. The web transaction times, this is the front end time. So when the site did respond, it was at least 4 seconds. And this is This is app server and browser as well. So 4 seconds to even look at a page was on average much higher when it came out of cache or when the site was failing, usually around 10 seconds a lot of times. So as you can imagine, they were able to use a lot of help. And their performance and their stats, which I'll go into a little bit, was definitely something that needed to be improved. Just another graph. So at the end of these graphs, you can see where I made some quick improvements when we first finally got access to the code, and it was actually really low-hanging fruit. There were queries being called inside of a loop, so it was getting all the pages inside the site, which was about 1,000, and then doing a loop looking at 10 things. So that was where the 10,000 queries, and some of them were doing it twice, so even up to 20,000 queries for non-functional needs. So this, assuming I've got decent internet, is a video. So I'll explain this a little bit. So this is a good way of perceiving, how users are looking at your site. This site is called, well, I have it later. It's which loads faster. On the left, these are just the mobile renderings of the same site. On the left is the old non-performant site, and on the right is the updated site that we had done as of about a month ago. And you'll see it basically, so to walk you through it, it's going to go on the home page and then click on a channel page and then click on an article page on that channel page. So 3 pages. Normal site should take a couple of seconds at most. So just watch it play. So, and the first was actually cached. So now you're seeing the pages load. The one on the right is already on the channel page. One on the left is still loading the home page. The one on the right is now loading the article page. Effectively, the user is done while it's loading a few things on the footer. The one on the left is still on the channel page. Still on the channel page. Will be on the channel page for a little bit longer. And while the user could have clicked something on the top, more likely they were trying to scroll and see something a little bit lower. And as you can see, if you can imagine trying to click through a site and taking, I think it's about 40 seconds to load 3 pages. I'm not going to say that the one on the right is super performant, but where we took it from to now, A, it's a lot faster to render, but B, it's actually staying up, so when they do get traffic, they're able to handle that traffic on the servers that we have for them. Click out here. So here's some stats from their Google Analytics. As you can see on the left side of the graph is a pretty typical media site. They get some good traffic on weekends, or Facebook promote, or if some users on Facebook promote them quite a bit. But on the right was right when, so that first blip up is when we did some of the improvements, and then another set of improvements and a third set of improvements. Now, the traffic isn't directly correlated to our performance improvements, I'll just say that. They did have some good content that weekend. However, when I looked back further, the reason why the spikes in traffic didn't keep going up the way they did on this weekend was because the site would go down. So if you can imagine, people on Facebook clicking on an article, waiting 10 seconds or 20 seconds for a white page, they're not going to share it. They're not going to click on the next page. So by just maintaining the site on a good architecture and making those performance, they were able to increase quite a bit their traffic. So the sessions were up pretty quickly when we did those first improvements. These are some of the other stats around same idea: sessions, users, page views, they're all up. This again attributed to a lot the fact that the site was staying up, but also the fact that users were actually seeing content and actually either sharing it or able to click to the next page to get to the content that they wanted to get to. All right. So some other data that we all kind of know. I used to have data about e-commerce. Those are pretty well-known stats, whether it's Amazon, Walmart.com. They've all put stats about every second of incremental seconds that a site takes to load is a certain percentage of revenue down. And that's great for large e-commerce sites, but it doesn't exactly factor perfectly for every site. But it's a good way of looking at how sticky are sites, how quick are people going to actually hit the end goal that you have for them. So these stats are a little bit more current in the growth of mobile, because what we have to look at now are people are on now mobile devices, and by mobile I mean handheld, of course. So they're on handheld, they might be on tablets with Wi-Fi. Some percentage of that, they're on a Wi-Fi that's a decent connection, but a lot of times, the high percentage of it is actually, whether it's 3G, LTE, or some slightly faster version of wireless, is still much slower than your broadband at home. And a lot of the people are getting their content, or even shopping these days, on their phones. So with that connection slowing down, it's even more important that you give them a performance site, because if you look at the rendering that I showed before was with a broadband connection. So it's all about how fast the site is. But if you have large assets, now you're dealing with their connection as well. So it's just compounding. So it takes a long time for the site to load, and then it takes a long time for the site to get to the user. So it's even adding to their frustration. The other thing is smaller devices. So they're seeing a smaller percentage of your site. These are, if you're dealing with responsive sites, you should be performing or adding to the performance of the parts that they're actually rendering first or trying to get to first. So if you saw there, it was a mobile size. So you're only seeing a very small portion of the site. The other things we could do with that site would be to optimize them for their mobile traffic. 303 has about 87% phone and mobile traffic, yet their pages are enormously long, with a lot of photos going all the way down. So the idea that someone's going to actually scroll, I don't even know how many times you'd have to scroll up, is not unlikely. So there's no point in having a lot of that content. So you can actually optimize some of that content as well. So you can get a quick drink. Another big why is, of course, the SEO benefit. And I'll spin this a little bit differently than I've done in the past, where the idea of SEO benefit was the Google and a few others added to their algorithm probably 4 or 5 years ago at this point. The more performant sites, we're going to get higher up on the scale. The lower performant ones, we're going to start getting bumped down. Well, that worked for a while, and a lot of sites reacted to that. The problem was it didn't help enough as far as Google saw or Facebook saw. They still felt like their users were telling them that the Facebook or the Google is slow, because a lot of their users see the internet as Google or as Facebook, unfortunately. So their perception of Facebook was the perception of these sites that they were going to. So what did they do? They came out with Facebook Instant Articles, basically a proprietary format that only Facebook is using to render very streamlined content, and also Google AMP. So AMP on the left, you can see our site, and then Facebook Instant Articles is on the right, a much more streamlined version of the site than what the regular Washington Post. Now, you can do a lot more than what we've done on ours. You can actually color it to the right color scheme. You can actually add the right color fonts and everything like that. But what they do strip out, and this is important for media sites, is a lot of the tracking that they've been applying over the years. So all of that strips down the times and actually makes the site render a lot faster. But now they're having to deal with, on the Facebook Instant Article side, they're dealing with basically revenue coming from Facebook that they're going to get a cut out of versus their advertisers, and they're adding to it almost every day, but there's still limitations. So now they basically cut us off at the knees and said, now you're going to do this because they're obviously going to promote this content over a standard article. And now tools. So tools is the basis of the talk, but obviously we'll talk about how to improve your site among different ways. The first is knowledge. You can go to these talks, obviously, but you can also read, most of you, except for me. It took me a while to read this book. This book is really thin, but a really great book. This is more specifically around designing, but as any developer goes into a project, you have to either talk to your designer, convince stakeholders as well that they're trying to design a certain thing. And this is how the process can go. This is a good book for other reasons as well. She donates all of her proceeds to a few nonprofits or charities that are specific to technology and increasing technology in people that generally don't get access to technology. So it's a great book. She's a manager of engineering at Etsy, and Etsy does a ton of performance talks and a lot of stuff on GitHub as well around performance. The other thing, I talked about this before, is comparison. So which loads faster is one of a few sites. So what I use this one for is I showed you there, to show myself what the improvements were of a site that we've already fixed. But you can also talk to, if you're talking to clients or talking to your boss about your competitors, you can compare your site to other sites. Especially if they're going to be faster, you can show that and show the rendering of both of them. You can do it at different sizes as well. The one downside is at least this one no longer or doesn't support HTTPS. So if your site is running on HTTPS, which it should be, it's not going to work so well, but you can always create a dev instance or fake it in another way. So here's some quick tools. So these are the tools that I use when I'm coming into an engagement and I need to either check it and fix it right away. This is how I can get some of the low-hanging fruit. So I do these during development as well, but I'll show you some other tools that we use that's a little bit more automated. So I'll explain the three. They're essentially, at this point, very similar. They all allow you to, they're all web-based. A couple of them have actual browser extensions as well. So you can go to a website and then use the browser extension. For instance, obviously, if you used Google's PageSpeed, if you're using Chrome, that's part of it, part of the developer tools. So what they do, you type in a URL. It's going to go out there and crawl the URL with a real browser, essentially a real browser. It's going to do a bunch of analysis on the responses based on a certain location. A couple of them do it on a couple of locations and give you a response. So if you can see, and I'll go through Google PageSpeed in a second, but they all give you some sort of a grade, how well you're doing. And if you get a B or even a C and don't get too concerned necessarily. Look at some competitors. If you're looking at your competitors and they're getting a C as well and you're getting a C plus, let's say, or a B, you are doing better. There's always ways of improving, but this is just a way of taking a snapshot of what things are doing right now. If you make some improvements, this is, if you're not going to install the tools or buy some of the other tools, you can still go back to this and keep using it. So I'll exit out of here and just check out Google PageSpeed. How's the... All right. So I ran it on our site, but admittedly, our site is really light. We are a development shop. We are not a design shop. We're not a design agency. We don't have a lot of photos. We don't have a lot of interactivity. We have some content, and we have our logo. So we do get a decent grade. However, we really should be able to have 100%. But we're using WordPress. We're using some plugins that allow us to do some interesting stuff on our blog posts. And it's our own site, so we don't spend all of our engineering effort cleaning it up. If it would have been an 89, I would have spent some time and got it to an A, but the fact that it was a 90, I went with it. I'll go through, hopefully, let me go up here actually. Yeah. So let's just check out Develop Denver. I think I do have to type in, assuming it's HTTPS, and click Analyze. So again, this is a free web-based tool. Type in any URL, HTTPS or HTTP. It will give you some information. The nicest thing about these tools, and I think all three of them do this for you, it will actually, let me find it real quick. So when it's telling you to optimize images, it actually gives you some URLs to download. So you can just download them, throw them on your site, and you're done. And it'll take that, take a look at them, because this is a computer fixing it for you. It might have over-optimized it, but and obviously, or as well, if you're doing a 5% reduction or something like that, definitely take a look and see if it's even worth it. But if you're getting 20%, 30%, it's pretty easy to just take that, download it, and re-upload the image. The other ones are a little more complex. So enabling compression, the recommendations for those would be, sometimes they're not even on your site. So if you have Google Analytics, if you have some third-party tracking or ads, you're really not going to even be able to control a lot of that. So if you're a media site or any type of site that has those third-party tools on it, you're likely not going to get an A. You can try really hard, but you'll be in the B range most likely, just to throw that out there, because you're relying on some other third parties. Now, possibly you can bring some of those third parties in and optimize those. But again, all three of these do act pretty similarly in the sense that what they're doing is the same. They're going to respond with different numbers. So I'll show you in a minute a tool that we had built out that actually gives you all three of the numbers so you can track the numbers. So again, this is nice to have as far as checking out a site, seeing what it looks like, and then making some quick fixes. But if you're dealing with a site that you're maintaining long-term, or you're taking over and maintaining long-term, you'll want to have some historical data. So I'll show you how to do that. All right. I think that's... Present, zoom, all right, good. So first off, for our tools, we put up a Vagrant. So this is a little more advanced for some, and I'll go through some other tools that do basically the same thing that you don't have to do yourself. But this, if you like to customize things yourself, if you like the idea of contributing back to open source, if you don't like spending dollars for some other organization, these are all open source tools that you can go down, you can fork hopefully and help us and contribute back maybe, or just fork and spin up the Vagrant yourself. We run it on a DigitalOcean, and it takes about a 4 gig server, so it's a little bit more than the normal, but we're monitoring some bigger sites. So 303 is a decent sized sites, but some of the other clients that we have are even bigger with a lot of assets. So the bigger the sites you are, the more kind of horsepower you need underneath it. But the actual code is all free. And we're not saying that we built all of it. In fact, all we did was put it together under a Vagrant. So we're using SiteSpeed.io, which I'll go through these really quickly and then talk about SiteSpeed. So SiteSpeed.io basically is what does it crawls it and does some monitoring and gets some data, but it doesn't store the data necessarily. It sends the data into Graphite, which is another open source tool, which is a graphing tool, but also just a data storage. And it uses Selenium, which is in the middle, to do some of those requests for us. Vagrant is just what we put together to basically be able to type in a couple of commands and then have the server up and running. And then Grafana is what takes the other three and puts it into a presentation that actually looks fairly nice. So, SiteSpeed, I think it's on my other window. No. So you could run SiteSpeed all by itself, and they've got good instructions on how to do it. You can do it off your local, whether you have a Mac. It's node-based, so you can basically run it on any machine, I assume. Spin it up. It'll be a server, and you can add some configuration, and it'll basically give you, I'll show you the example. So similar to the ones I was showing you before, it's going to give you some data that's, you take a look at it, you can evaluate which ones, I don't know what this site is, but it's their example site. You can point it at any site you want, and I don't know that, so I don't think they offer a text area or text field that you could type in anyone, so you do have to install it, but again, it's pretty easy to install if you wanted to just get this amount of data. The other tools are what I was talking about. It takes all of this, plus other tools that can pump data into it and store it and have historical data for long term. And it, by default, or by its instructions, it'll show you how to do all three if you follow all the instructions, or you can use the GitHub repository and actually do it kind of all together. So Graphite was the second one I talked about. So again, while this gets your historical data in a place that you can look at graphs, the graphs are not all that easy to use. You can make these graphs, kind of combine them and do a lot of things with it. I didn't spend a lot of time with it because they actually recommend you use Grafana. And Grafana basically gives you a dashboard to almost drag and drop, but there's a lot of like configuration of the data and the metrics. But you get, let me reload, see why the Y-score is NA. There we go. So like I was saying before, so we have Google PageSpeed, we have YSlow, and then we have SiteSpeed.io, which is the internal one. And these are all statistical numbers based on history in this case, 303 magazine's homepage on the desktop. I can change here to mobile, and I can go to a couple other pages, but the nice thing is that it's keeping long-term statistics on all of this. So I can go up to, I don't think it's going to go back to, it might go to 7 days. We had some data issues, and we don't maintain a lot of our own stuff all the time until we present it. But we use it on a few other servers. So you can go back as far as you want, but again, it's giving you all that data that it was showing you on the SiteSpeed.io, whether it's number of assets, number of JavaScript files, how big the JavaScript files are, the page weight in general, which again, this site could still use a lot of front-end development to wean down the performance. So it's almost 4.5 megs at this point, or over 4.5 megs. But as you start to make improvements, you can actually see all this graphing and show why you're spending money or time on these types of things. Compare that to your Google Analytics, and you should be seeing an increase in page views as well. The other nice thing, so that's mainly front end, all of this stats. You can add in a back end server monitoring if you're managing your own servers. So we're using Nagios, and that's sending the data into Graphite, and then we have graphs, nicer looking graphs, or at least a single portal for both graphs. So we're monitoring some very basic stuff on this box, and I think one other box that we use. All of our other boxes are on managed hosts that we don't actually have access to install things on. All right. So again, this is the open source version of it. There are other ones, and you can install each one of these individually, or you can go out and use essentially free, but depending on how much you want to use it, depending on how much data you want to have, you'll have to start paying. So these are the ones that we've used more recently. And basically, I'm not going to say that these are the absolute best out there, let's say. These are the ones that I've used long enough that I have a really good in-depth knowledge of. About every 6 months, for some of these, new things came out. Like Status Cake, I used Pingdom for years and never looked at anything else. And all of a sudden, I saw Status Cake come out, and I checked it out. And then all of a sudden, I started using that one as well. It's a bit cheaper. They're adding to it. They're newer, so they're actually adding more features quickly. I think actually they're local. I didn't do that much research. They at least have a local dev team. But these top two, so Pingdom and Status Cake, are basically doing the same thing and very easy to configure. What you do, you create an account, you type in a URL like we did for the web ones, and then you're going to start getting data. You can set it to look at it every hour, every day, every 5 minutes. The lower you get, the more likely you're going to be paying for these services. And also the more websites you get, the more likely that you'll have to pay for it. But in general, almost all of them are going on the same model as if you want data going backwards, you're going to pay some. They're not super expensive, but depending on the revenue of your site, they may or may not be worth paying for each one. We're using both Pingdom and Status Cake to have a little bit of, if one tells us the site's down, the other one's not, then we're not going to get out of bed type of thing, because they also do monitoring, and they'll tell us if the site is down. So all of our clients, we have one of these or two of these looking at them for both performance as well as just is the site up, because we don't control the full stack on all of them. So sometimes things go down, and we like to be able to yell at the hosting company. New Relic is quite a bit different. I showed you some stats on New Relic. So New Relic will do both the back end as well as the front end. So it's essentially what I was also showing you with the open source version of it, but you don't have to maintain servers, you don't have to maintain security updates for all those things, and it's also, the UI is quite a bit better and more usable. It's also a lot more expensive than free, but even a lot more expensive than hosting it yourself. But the features and functionality that you're going to get from something like New Relic are probably more than most of the open source packages together are going to provide, at least for now. We use New Relic a lot of times when we're taking on new clients, because they can either install it on their server, or we can install it when we get with them. They also, so with WordPress, a lot of the platforms that we deal with that are managed, they actually allow you to have, or they install New Relic for you. So while they're a managed service and we can't really touch the servers, they'll install it for us and we can start getting that data. And even some of them that we use are actually free. They provide it as their hosting, as part of their hosting cost. So it allows us to do, when we do deployments, and if the site goes down, obviously it's our fault. But if we haven't done any deployments and the site starts getting slow, well, we can start looking at New Relic and say, well, that page now has way more images than it ever had. It might have 100 images as a gallery. And we never thought about that you'd be doing that. So now that's why your site's getting slow. But we can start pinpointing where and why. There have been a lot of talks around performance, and I've seen New Relic come up quite a bit as far as what people have been using to monitor. It gets down to basically almost the line of code. In WordPress, it'll tell you which function inside of WordPress is getting slow. It tells you which database query is getting slow. It also tells you, if for the front end, if you're having some slow JavaScript, and it can even tell you if your host or your DNS is getting slow. So it's a lot of detail. The fourth one is more similar to the other two. The difference with that one is it is a bit more pricey for when you start paying for it. It also has a lot more data, and the graphs look prettier, which sometimes is important for, if you're presenting it to someone else. Pingdom and StatusCakes have good enough looking graphs, but sometimes people like to see the things moving, and SpeedCurve does that. Outside of that, the functionality is really quite a bit the same in my opinion. Just throwing it, has anyone else used another tool? Because I know I've seen a few others pop up recently.
SpeedCurve is actually built on WebPage Test, which is open source.
Yep, that's right.
You want to read some of that.
I didn't think about that. Yeah, so it is built on WebPage Test. So the data that you get goes into SpeedCurve from WebPage Test. And I should have mentioned this here. We're using WebPage Test as well as one of our data points. So you're getting a score from WebPage Test that gets pumped into there. You need a key, and there's documentation on how to do that. But yeah, WebPage Test is kind of the source for a lot of different places, including SpeedCurve. But the graphs that you're going to get from SpeedCurve and the UI and the usability of adding and configuring is going to be much better than likely what you're going to build by yourself. All right. Yeah. So some trends. I wanted to talk about some trends around. So the reason I go through all this data is part of the tools is knowing why it's important and why we've done things wrong in the past and why things are where they are today. So if you look at this site, HTTP Archive is kind of almost the sister site to the Internet Archive. The Internet Archive takes an archive of what sites look visually over years, many, many years, in fact. HTTP Archive actually looks at the data around the internet. So I took, and this link has a lot of graphs, but I took a couple of graphs in here just to speak about specifically. And again, it's only going back to 2010 at the moment. It used to go back quite a bit further, and you can actually see kind of a climb up and then kind of a plateau and then a dip, and then it would level off again, and then it would climb up. So we're on probably our third or fourth iteration of, if you look back in here, 2010, it was kind of plateauing, and then things start to grow again. This is HTML transfer size, so the size of web pages essentially, or the content being delivered. So with a single page app, the HTML is really small, but this is actually accounting for what it takes when it fully renders. So that's why otherwise you'd probably see maybe a little dip again, but it's actually the full size after it renders. So we're still growing. I don't know why. Actually, I kind of do know why. One of the reasons is, we have feature creep. We have, people thinking that on a homepage you have to have everything that's important on the homepage. We still haven't adapted to the idea of mobile first across the board. We talk about it a lot. Every conference I go to that's around design talks about it a lot. Developers aren't always necessarily going that approach, but we're also dealing with a lot of legacy systems and content and CSS essentially. So you add on essentially to make it mobile friendly. So you add markup, you add CSS, and I'll get to that in a minute. So that's one reason why we're seeing a slight increase. I mean, this is a 50% or 100% increase on the top one. Statistically, it's not a perfect it's not exact, but I think it's pretty good idea that over the past 6 years we have been growing. Now the nice thing is bandwidth is getting bigger, computers are getting faster, so I don't think the web is getting slower perceptual, as a perception. From 6 years ago, the data speed that we had on a handheld was way worse than it is today. So I don't think that everyone's perceiving that the web is getting slower necessarily, at least on a whole, but obviously we're adding more to it. And at some point, it's going to level off and then start to dip again, is my prediction. So I talked about this before. So I think this one specifically is kind of when responsive websites started to kick off, and instead of fixing them correctly, we added more CSS to make them look right on a mobile device. So that was the initial. I think that's the initial uptick that we see up on that graph. And then we started adding, as we always do. Well, now it's going to look differently when I swipe and scroll in different ways, and not doing it just for a phone. If we did, I think that this graph would actually dip down a lot, because there's a lot less functionality on the phone that we see for most websites. This is a good and bad thing. I think this is good for a number of reasons. This custom fonts is replacing, in a lot of areas over the past, early on, was replacing images. So you're swapping out images that are good. They're cacheable, but they're not very functioning. They're not. A screen reader can't read them unless there's appropriate alt tags. They're also slower. The time it renders. But the downside is also that we kind of went from, all right, we're going to make our headings a custom font. Well, why don't we make our subheadings a custom font, and then our body a custom font, and then over here we're going to make it a different font. And by the way, I want it, 700 over here, which is a size, and then 300 over here, and then bold and italics, and then some other thing. And then essentially our whole website became custom fonts. And those requests happen on every single page, essentially, on most browsers. And they're fairly large as you add them up. So while initially I think we got some really great improvement, I personally think, and a lot of the tools that I showed you before would actually monitor that and show you as you add fonts, you can actually monitor them just like JavaScript and CSS to see how that's affecting the site. You can see that it's getting slower, but also see how it's rendering. Because I'm sure most of you see sites, it renders, you can read it, and then it changes. As an end user, as a developer, you're gonna be okay with that for the most part. As an actual end user, they're going to have, they're going to go back, essentially, if that keeps happening. Because it doesn't just do one change, and then the ads load in, and then it pushes over a little bit more, and then it pushes up, and then there's a modal. So all these things combined make for a bad experience on top of performance. This is a great one, kind of. It should be 0 by now. I've been tracking this one for a while. I can't believe we're not at 0 yet, but most pages still have ads, and some ads still have Flash, essentially. I don't see a lot of sites that are, the splash page anymore. And most Flash isn't even going to render on, it's not going to render on my laptop, and it's not going to render on a lot of new laptops anymore unless someone installs it. And Adobe doesn't even support it anymore. So, but of course, we're going to add more other things that are going to be, this graph we're going to look at 10 years from now and be like, oh, why did we have all this other animation? So we end with that, and I probably talked faster than, not too bad. We talked about why it is important. It's not just because we like fast sites or we like to make things fast because we're developers. It's actually a lot of long-term effects come into actually making the site faster, from more users to basically more revenue is one approach. Also, in the long run, people are not going to share your content if it's not fast. Also, we talked about Facebook and Google not even linking to your site in the first place if it's not fast, and that's going to happen. You can make a quick improvement by adding AMP or Facebook Instant Articles. Neither one of them are super fast to do. If you have a lot of specific content that's not just blog posts, those are actually relatively complicated to implement. But if you don't go that approach, your traffic's going to basically go down to nothing again. I talked about quite a few tools as far as monitoring, as far as trying to fix it. I didn't go into a lot of details on all those tools, so when I go into Q&A, you can ask me and we can go back if you're interested to maybe pull some up. I didn't pull up New Relic. New Relic is massive, but we could go through that if you have specific questions. And then we talked about trends. So hopefully we have more questions now. Other than yeah, so bit.ly endeavor-perf-tools is where it is. So all the links are there. I did that link before I made some changes, but I think only changed order and didn't change content. And you can also come up. Yeah.
Does the instant article stuff all work on like microdata format tags?
So the MDF, that's a good question. I don't know.
So you can like put in the whole article in microdata tags.
Yep. You can. I don't know how it renders it. So instant articles, essentially it's a feed. I'll just tell everyone. And so is AMP. Well, AMP is actually almost HTML, but instant articles is essentially a feed of your content that renders, or it only shows Facebook very stripped down version. So it'll show you their body, the title, an image, like a feature image, and then you can add some additional ad code and actually their version of iframes, which is great. But it's a really stripped down version of it. So that's why they can load it. They essentially load it on the background in the app before you even click on it, it's already loaded, and then they show it to their users. No other questions? Yes.
Have you ever had an experience where you sold a client like performance improvements and you did that and then they still weren't happy with that?
Yes. Yeah. So she asked if I'd ever sold a client, or worked on a project, let's say, and said that we were going to do a certain amount of performance and got to the end of it and they still weren't happy. Yes, I have. Performance is a perception thing. And people, the hard part, initially we would say that we're going to make you a really fast or performance site, and this was before. So I've run Endeavor for a year. I worked for another consulting company for 8 years, and actually worked in other companies before that, inside of companies. And we were always saying, yeah, we'll make it really fast. Well, that's a objective thing. So we started putting numbers to it. So people talk about performance budgets a lot, or starting to. So you can put numbers to all these things and say that I'm going to make your site a certain level. The problem when we're building a site or working with a design firm to build a site is that, well, we say that, and then the designer does something different, or the client asks for something different, and then how do we make it performant at that point? It's hard. We do as much as we can. And that's what I have to tell them, essentially. We've cut down, we've made the CSS as light as we can, we've made the server architecture the right way. We're monitoring it, and we can actually, we do all these monitoring tools during development. So we can actually say, all right, now when we added that feature, look what happened. And we usually say it when it happens, because we think it's going to affect it. And that's why the historical data is really important. But even the free ones that you can go out, you can take the data, some of them export it, and you can just put it in Excel and keep it. While you're not going to have a website to show them or pretty graphs, you can make graphs on your own with this data. And it's not always, like if you looked at it the same page 5 times, you're going to get different numbers also. So, yes?
I have 2. What's the biggest issue you see on the server side, and what's the biggest issue you see on the client side?
So on the server side, I would say that as sites grow, the way things were developed weren't, and not that they weren't thought through, let's say, but they were thought in a very specific way, because all projects get rushed at a certain point. So they build them a certain way. So for example, the 303 site, right? The code changes we made were all server side. They're all PHP changes. That theme was not built to have, I think, 1,000 pages. So pages and posts are different in WordPress. So most sites have like 5 pages and a lot of posts. So that theme didn't know that you'd have 1,000 pages. So it looped through 1,000 and then did other loops. So it's usually some low-hanging fruit around, some loops, which are doing database requests. A lot of times systems aren't built to have caching. So whether they're opcode caching, or even caching on the database or caching in between. So sometimes it's adding in one of those layers. At one time that was really complex. Most modern languages have libraries to connect to, whether it's Redis or some other cache, memcache, or something like that in between. Sometimes that hurts actually though too. So adding that layer in might have latency that you didn't have before. Okay, anyone else? Yes?
So a lot of the talk was about initial page load performance. Have you ever deal with performance issues in regard to like bigger web applications and big memory leaks, stuff like that?
Yeah. So mainly with iOS, actually. So outside of web. So especially memory leaks, because you have to manage it, or you did it one time. You had to manage everything. With JavaScript libraries, we have seen, as you add more libraries, and this is not too current, but over the past few years, when you're basically just adding jQuery library after jQuery library after jQuery library, that builds up because a lot of that data builds up in memory. And the problem is a lot of times it's in the browser, as we all know, the way the browsers manage it more than the website. And that's the nice thing about doing web development is the browser really should take care of a lot of that memory management. Chrome, I closed about 20 tabs before coming up here, as most of you probably have as well. Chrome doesn't do a great job. It's done a better job than most, but that memory management on the app side gets to be important when you see, like you said, single page apps, when you're going through multiple, it starts to build up. And I didn't put any tools. New Relic actually came out, and I don't work for New Relic. I've said them a lot. And I don't get any type of, I pay, I don't get money from them. But they've actually come out with a new tool that I haven't tested on. It's for single page apps. And it does some of that monitoring. So I haven't tried it out yet. But that's the one, I haven't seen other tools that are actually monitoring single page apps yet. But that's the first. And out of that will come other open source ones. And then I'll start to look at it. Anyone else? All right.
Are the slides going to be up?
Yes. So all the slides, that bottom link, go for it. I'll leave this up a little longer because there's a big gap between now and the next one. Great. Thank you.